A giant rancher found his settler cook, trembling beneath the weight of a past she couldn't outrun, so he did something that brought even the sheriff to tears. But can one man's mercy heal the scars of a woman who's forgotten how to trust? The dawn over Copper Creek rose slow and red, stretching long shadows across Rowan Cade's land. The air held that dry, quiet weight that came before summer heat. Only the creak of the windmill broke the silence. Rowan was a man who moved through mornings like this without hurry, his boots heavy, his heart heavier still. He'd learned to live with quiet since the day his wife was laid under the cottonwood tree. But this morning, something was wrong. As he rode back from the far pasture, he saw smoke rising from his kitchen chimney. It wasn't the thin, gray whisper of last night's coals. This was new smoke, alive and curling. His massive frame stiffened. No one had permission to step foot in his home. He dismounted slowly, tied his horse to the post, and pushed open the door. Inside, a small woman stood by his stove, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot that smelled of onions and herbs. She was barefoot, her dress patched in 3 places, and her hair brown with streaks of gold, hung in a loose braid over one shoulder. She looked up, startled but unbroken. I didn't mean no harm," she said, voice trembling. "Sheriff Knoll said you might need a cook. He told me I could try my luck here." Rowan didn't answer right away. He wasn't a man for words. He took her in the wary eyes, the hollow cheeks, the way she kept her hands low, as though ready to defend herself. "I never asked for a cook," he said finally. Her fingers clenched the wooden spoon. "Then I'll be on my way after supper, sir. I just needed a roof till dark." The stew's scent hit him again, rich and real. It had been years since his kitchen smelled like home. He glanced at the pot, then back to her. "You can stay the night," he said. "Work for food if you mean to." Relief flickered across her face like a candle's shadow. "Thank you, Mr. Cade." "Rowan?" he corrected. She nodded. "Willa Gray." The name felt like a secret handed over. She ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before him. He sat, watching her move quick, practiced, like someone used to silence. He took a bite. It was simple but good, better than anything he'd eaten since Ilara died. His chest ached with memory, but he said nothing. That night, after she'd gone to sleep in the loft, Rowan walked out onto the porch. The land spread wide and empty beneath the stars, but the house behind him wasn't silent anymore. A faint hum drifted down from the hayloft. Soft, trembling, beautiful. He didn't know what song it was, but it stirred something deep and half-forgotten. He leaned against the post and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like grief. It felt like waiting. If you've ever seen a man's silence begin to break, wait till you see what he finds behind her secret. The next morning, Rowan Cade rose before the sun, as he always did, but for the first time in years, he wasn't alone in the rhythm of dawn. From the kitchen came the faint clatter of pans, the steady scrape of a knife against a cutting board. The scent of coffee drifted through the air like a promise he didn't know he'd been waiting for. He stepped to the doorway, boots silent on the worn wood floor. Willa Gray was there, hair tied back, apron crooked, sleeves rolled high. The light from the stove fire brushed against her skin, revealing faint scars that ran across her wrists like pale threads. She moved fast, careful, every gesture neat and practiced. When she noticed him, she nearly dropped the tin cup in her hand. "Mornin', Mr. Cade," she said softly. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," he said. "Been up a while." She nodded, eyes cast downward, and poured him coffee. Her hands shook slightly, spilling a bit on the table. Rowan pretended not to notice. "Smells good," he murmured. "Hope it tastes better than it looks," she said, with a faint, nervous smile. They ate in silence, biscuits, bacon, black coffee. Rowan found himself studying her without meaning to, how she sat small in her chair, as though afraid to take up too much space. When the wind rattled the window, she flinched, her fingers twitching toward her wrists again. "You work too fast," Rowan said finally. Her eyes lifted. "Can't stand being idle." "Idleness ain't a crime," he replied. "For some of us, it was," she whispered. The words hung between them. Rowan didn't press. He'd learned long ago that truth, like seeds, only grew when left to the right weather. Later that day, he found her behind the barn, sitting on an overturned bucket, head bowed. Her shoulders shook. She tried to hide it, but the sound of her quiet sobs carried. Rowan stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel. "Something wrong with the hens?" he asked gently. She wiped her face fast, forcing a small laugh. "No, sir, they're just smarter than me." He stood there a moment, unsure what to say. He wasn't good with comfort, hadn't been since Elara's passing. Instead, he took out a folded handkerchief from his pocket, clean and unused, and set it on the fence post beside her. "The wind's bad today," he said. "Best to keep the dust out of your eyes." Willa looked at the cloth, then at him. Her lips trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once and turned back toward the house, letting her have her tears. That night, after the dishes were done and lamps dimmed, Rowan sat by the window listening. From the loft above came that same soft humming as before, fragile, unsure, but warm enough to reach even the coldest corners of his house. Rowan leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. He didn't recognize the tune, but it felt like something worth remembering. And for the first time in 6 long years, he smiled. By the third morning, Copper Creek Ranch no longer felt hollow. The steady rhythm of work had returned, the scrape of broom bristles on wood, the clink of dishes being set to dry, the soft hum of a woman who tried to make herself invisible but couldn't quite manage it anymore. Willa Gray had a way of filling silence without speaking much. Her hands moved like they were born to create comfort, kneading dough, stirring broth, mending shirts that hadn't seen a needle in years. Even the old hound, Rust, followed her now, tail wagging slow and lazy. Rowan Cade watched from the porch as she hung laundry on the line. The morning light caught in her hair, and for a moment, he almost forgot she wasn't meant to stay. He shook the thought away, but it lingered like wood smoke. Inside, the scent of baking bread drifted through the air. Real bread, not the hard tack and salted pork he'd lived on since Elara died. Rowan paused by the stove, watching her brush the dough with butter. "You bake like you've done it all your life," he said. She didn't look up. "Used to feed 12 mouths in the house I came from," she said quietly. "Made 2 loaves every morning before the sun was up. Must have been a big family." Her hand faltered, just for a second. "Not family," she murmured. "Just people who liked being served." Rowan said nothing, but something in his chest twisted. He understood more from what she didn't say than what she did. When the bread came out of the oven, golden and warm, she cut him a thick slice and set it on the table. "You don't owe me wages," she said softly. "Just let me stay a while longer." He studied her face, tired, cautious, but hopeful. "You can stay," he said, "for as long as you need." The words seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked back what might have been tears and nodded. "Then I'll make this place worth it." That afternoon, Rowan rode out to mend the north fence. The sun burned low, and the scent of bread still clung to his hands. When he returned, the table was set again, stew, cornbread, and a clean napkin folded beside his bowl. He sat down, and for a moment, the house didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt lived in, warmed by more than firewood. After supper, Willa stood by the sink, drying the dishes. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, watching her hum a tune so faint it nearly vanished into the creak of the floorboards. It wasn't sorrowful, not tonight. It was gentle. He didn't know what kindness cost her, but he could see it was heavy. Every gesture, every smile, seemed pulled from a place that still hurt. When she turned, he said quietly, "You don't have to prove anything here." Her voice wavered. Maybe not, sir, but I need to remember how it feels to be useful. Rowan nodded once. Then we'll both learn, I reckon. And for the first time, she smiled, without flinching. By midweek, the small town of Copper Creek began to notice changes in Rowan Cade. The once silent rancher now came to town for supplies twice in a single week, a first in years. He spoke, even if it was only a few words. Folks stared, whispered, and wondered what kind of spell had been cast over the giant of the plains. That spell, of course, had a name: Willa Gray. Back at the ranch, she worked with quiet devotion, though her eyes darted to the horizon more often now. Sometimes, she froze mid-task, as if listening for something or someone. Rowan didn't ask. He sensed her fear, the way animals sense storms. Low and close. Late one afternoon, as she was hanging laundry, the rhythmic crunch of hooves approached. A voice called out, rough but familiar, "Afternoon, Cade." Sheriff Jed Knoll reined in his horse by the fence. He was a man carved by the same land, broad shoulders, creased eyes, and the kind of honesty that made people nervous. Rowan stepped off the porch. "Jed." The sheriff nodded toward the house. "Heard you got company." Rowan didn't answer. His silence was enough. Jed sighed, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "She's been cooking for you, I hear. Kind woman, polite. Folks in town are talking." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Is that a problem?" "Not for me," the sheriff said slowly. "But for her, it might be." He reached into his coat and unfolded a small worn paper. "A woman matching her description's been asked after by name. Says she's wanted back east." Rowan's brow furrowed. "Wanted?" "Not for robbery. Not for murder. For runnin'," Jed said quietly. "Seems she left a man's house without his permission. The name of Harlan Beck claims she owes him by contract." Rowan's eyes hardened. "Ain't no man owns another." Jed looked at him long and hard. "I figured you'd say that. But the law's gray, Cade. If Beck comes out here with proof, I can't stop him without cause." The rancher's hands balled into fists, the knuckles pale. "You tell Beck this Copper Creek doesn't belong to his kind." Jed replaced his hat, uneasy. "I didn't come to start trouble, just to warn you. Keep her close. If she's innocent, she'll need someone who isn't afraid to stand tall." Rowan nodded once. "You did your duty, Sheriff." As Jed rode off, the dust from his horse lingered in the sunset like smoke. Willa came from behind the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was pale. Was that the sheriff? Rowan studied her for a long moment. "Just making his rounds." She gave a shaky smile, but fear flickered behind it. "Then I'll bake something for supper," she said. "Maybe bread'll make things right." When she turned away, Rowan looked toward the horizon where the sheriff had gone. The air felt different, charged, watchful. Inside the house, the smell of fresh bread rose once again. But even its warmth couldn't quiet the chill that had crept into his bones. And somewhere far off, thunder rolled. The storm came in from the west, without warning, heavy clouds rolling like smoke across the open sky. The wind rattled the shutters, whistling through every crack in Rowan Cade's old house. By dusk, the rain had turned fierce, hammering against the roof like it meant to break it. Willa Gray stood on the porch, her thin frame outlined by lightning. She didn't flinch at the thunder. Instead, she watched the storm with that same distant look Rowan had seen in her eyes before, like she was searching for something inside it. "You ought to come in," he called over the wind. She turned her head slightly, voice soft. "It's how it happened, the night I ran." Rowan stepped beside her, letting the rain hit his hat brim and roll down his coat. She didn't look at him when she spoke next. "There was a storm like this back east. Only I wasn't watching it, I was running through it. I thought if I ran long enough it would wash me clean." He said nothing, only waited. Her voice trembled. "I was working in a big house, a man named Harlan Beck. He said I owed him for the years he fed me, clothed me. I was 16 when I signed his paper. By the time I learned what it meant, I couldn't leave without punishment. The wind howled, shaking the eaves. I didn't steal from him, she said fiercely, as if daring him to doubt her. He accused me of it when I refused him. Said he'd brand me a thief to every town west of the river. I left that night with nothing but a dress on my back and my mother's song in my head. Lightning flashed across her face, carving every line of exhaustion and fear into sharp relief. Rowan saw it all, the years of running, the weight she'd carried. He felt something inside him break and mend at the same time. You did what you had to, he said quietly. Willa's voice cracked. No one ever said that before. He turned to face her fully. Ain't for them to say. The rain came harder, flooding the yard. She shivered, her hands clutching the porch rail. Without a word, Rowan took off his coat and set it around her shoulders. She tried to protest, but he only said, You'll catch your death. When she met his eyes, the distance between them, months of silence, years of grief, seemed to dissolve. Inside, the fire burned low. They sat by it for hours, saying little. Every so often the thunder cracked and she would flinch, and he would murmur, It's only wind now. By the time the storm began to fade, Willa's head had fallen against his shoulder. The last thing she whispered before sleep was, I ain't never been safe before. Rowan looked into the dying fire, the shadows dancing across her face. You are now, he said, voice thick as gravel. Outside, the thunder rolled away, leaving only rain and the faintest trace of peace. The morning after the storm, the air smelled of wet sage and earth. Sunlight broke through the clouds in slow, golden shafts, touching the ranch like a benediction. For once, Rowan Cade didn't rush to the pastures. He lingered on the porch, mug in hand, listening to the low hum of a woman's song drifting from the kitchen. Willa Gray moved about the room with purpose, rolling dough, tending to the oven, humming a tune that was both fragile and brave. The storm had washed something clean between them, though neither spoke of it. Her shoulders were still tense, but her eyes carried a quiet steadiness that hadn't been there before. When she caught him standing in the doorway, she blushed faintly. There's enough bread to take into town, she said. Figured maybe folks could use it. A storm tore up half the valley. Rowan hesitated. The town's full of talk. I know, she said simply, wiping flour from her hands. But talk doesn't matter near as much as hunger. An hour later, they rode into Copper Creek together. He on his bay horse, she beside him in the wagon, a basket of bread cooling between them. It was the first time she'd gone to town since arriving, and though her chin was lifted, Rowan could see her fingers gripping the seat edge tight. The town was quiet, cautious. Children peeked from doorways. Women whispered behind gloved hands. The church bell tolled softly, calling folks to morning prayer and rumor in equal measure. When they reached the square, Willa climbed down and began passing out loaves. Storm's got no mercy, she said kindly to an old man with a broken hat brim. Least we can have some for each other. No one refused her bread. Some nodded, some smiled, a few still looked away. Then the preacher's wife approached, her voice sharp as vinegar. You must be the lady stayin' with Mr. Cade. Brave of you to show your face. Willa straightened, hands still gentle but her eyes steady. Bravery's a thing that grows where it's needed, she said softly. Before the woman could answer, Sheriff Jed Knoll crossed the square, tipping his hat. Morning, Miss Gray. Bread smells mighty fine. He gave Rowan a long look, half warning, half gratitude. Town's talkin', Cade, but talk ain't law. Rowan nodded. I know the difference. When they finished, Rowan bought her a ribbon from the general store, deep blue, the same color as the sky after a storm. She tried to refuse it, but he pressed it into her hand. For the trouble of feedin' a whole town, he said. That night, Willa tied the ribbon in her hair while she cooked. The lamplight made her look almost at peace. You shouldn't have spent it on me, she murmured. Maybe I should have sooner, Rowan replied. For the first time since she'd come west, Willa laughed a real laugh, soft and startled, like a bird remembering its wings. Outside, the church bell rang again, faint in the distance. This time, it didn't sound like judgment. It sounded like grace. By the time autumn's first chill touched Copper Creek, the ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt almost holy. The wheat fields glowed bronze in the dusk, and the air carried the scent of smoke and harvest. Inside the house, firelight flickered against the walls, softening the hard lines of memory that still clung to Rowan Cade's home. Willa Gray sat near the hearth, darning one of his old work shirts. The blue ribbon he'd bought her now tied her hair loosely, a quiet color against the shadows. Rowan watched her from his chair, boots propped on the edge of the hearth. He couldn't remember the last time a woman had sat by that fire. Maybe not since Elara, and even that thought hurt less than it used to. "Fire makes the place feel alive," Willa said quietly, not looking up from her stitching. "House used to sound like this," Rowan murmured. "Laughter, pots clatterin', a voice singin' off-key." She smiled faintly. "Yours or hers?" He chuckled, low and rough. "Hers. Mine wasn't made for songs." The laughter faded, replaced by a silence that pulsed with things unsaid. The fire popped. Willa's needle stilled. "Can I ask you something?" she said at last. "Reckon you can. Why'd you never marry again?" The question caught him off guard. He stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because the world stopped talkin' the day she died, and I didn't see a reason to start it back up." Her hands lowered into her lap. "You loved her deeply." He nodded once. "Too much, maybe. When she went, I thought if I stayed quiet enough, the ache would too." She studied him, voice soft. "You don't seem quiet anymore." Rowan's gaze lifted to meet hers. "That's your doin'." The words startled her. The color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I don't mean to trouble you, Mr. Cade." "You don't trouble me," he said simply. "You remind me what breathin' sounds like." The fire crackled between them, filling the stillness. Outside, the wind scraped against the window panes like dry leaves, whispering. Willa set the mended shirt aside and leaned toward the firelight. "Kindness," she said after a pause, "is the hardest thing to accept when you've been hurt by it." Rowan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She looked into the flames. He was kind at first. Harlan Beck, spoke gentle, promised safety. I believed him. Then every kindness turned to a chain. Her voice faltered, but she went on. "I still flinch when someone means well. I'm still waiting for the cost." Rowan stood then, slow and deliberate, and placed another log on the fire. "Ain't no cost here, Willa," he said, his voice steady. "You earned your peace. I won't take it from you." Her eyes shone in the flickering light, tears gathering but not falling. "Maybe peace doesn't have to be earned," she whispered. "Maybe it just has to be trusted." Rowan gave a quiet nod. "Then I'll trust it same as you." For a long while, neither spoke. The house creaked softly around them, alive again. And as the fire burned low, the silence that filled the room wasn't empty anymore. It was warm. The morning came sharp and windless, the kind of day when even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Rowan Cade was in the corral, checking the new gate latch, when he heard the sound of wagon wheels grinding up the long, dirt road. His gut tightened. Visitors were rare this far out, and rarely came without reason. Willa Gray was by the porch, beating dust from a rug, when she spotted the wagon cresting the ridge. Her hands froze mid-swing. A tall man sat at the reins, dressed too fine for frontier dust, a dark coat, polished boots, and a smug stillness that didn't belong to the West. The wagon stopped before the gate. The man climbed down slowly, his smile thin and deliberate. "Mr. Cade, I presume?" Rowan didn't answer right away. His stance alone was reply enough, broad, unyielding, silent. "I'm Harlan Beck," the man continued, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. "I believe you have something of mine." Rowan's hand settled on the fence post. "Don't reckon I own anything that belongs to you." Beck's smile widened. "A woman. Goes by the name Willa Gray. She's bound to me by law." Signed an indenture years back. Left my service without release. That makes her property. From the porch, Willa's voice cut through the air. You don't own me, Harlan. Beck turned toward her, and the politeness drained from his face. You'll watch your tone, girl. The law's the law. Rowan stepped between them, his shadow falling across Beck like a drawn curtain. You talk to me now, he said evenly. Beck's sneer returned. You think your size makes you the law here, rancher? I have papers, witnesses, and the sheriff's ear if I need it. You'll need more than paper to walk out with her, Rowan said. The silence that followed was taut as wire. Even the horses seemed to sense the danger. Beck cleared his throat, feigning calm. You're harboring a fugitive, Cade. The law will come down on you, too. Rowan's eyes didn't waver. Then let it come. For a moment, Beck faltered. He hadn't expected defiance this cold, this steady. I'll be back, he said finally, climbing into his wagon. With proof. With the sheriff. You can't hide her forever. Rowan watched as the wagon rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Only when it disappeared over the ridge did he turn to Willa. She stood rigid, her face pale beneath the morning light. He won't stop, she whispered. No, Rowan said quietly, but neither will I. She covered her mouth with both hands, the tremor in her shoulders betraying the fear she'd been holding in. Rowan stepped closer, not too close, but enough for her to feel his steadiness. You ain't alone now, he said. Tears glimmered in her eyes, but her voice was steady. Then I won't run anymore. That evening, as the sun bled red across the hills, Rowan sat on the porch cleaning his rifle while Willa hummed in the kitchen. The tune was soft, defiant, something new, born from the ashes of fear. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she locked the door, not to keep someone out, but to keep something precious in. The next morning broke cold and gray, the kind of light that made the land look stripped bare. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, but Willa Gray barely touched her cup. She kept glancing through the window toward the ridge. Every hour that passed felt borrowed. Rowan Cade stood by the fire, his face unreadable, as he loaded shells into his rifle. He wasn't preparing for war, just readying himself for what was coming. He'd lived long enough to know that men like Harlan Beck always came back. And by noon, the sound of hooves carried that truth up the valley. 2 riders appeared first, deputies by the look of their vests. Behind them came Beck, smug in his fine coat, and at the rear rode Sheriff Jed Knoll, his hat pulled low, face tight with something that wasn't quite approval or guilt. Willa stood on the porch, her hands clasped together. Rowan stepped out beside her, towering but calm, his presence a shield. Rowan, the sheriff called, dismounting. We need to talk. Talk then, Rowan said. Beck climbed down from his wagon, waving a folded document. This here's the law, Cade, signed and sealed. This woman belongs to me, until her debt is repaid. Rowan's gaze hardened. You brought men a piece of paper? Beck smirked. I brought the law. You can't fight it. Willa's voice broke through the rising wind. That's not law, it's cruelty. You used me, Harlan. You broke every promise you ever made. Beck's eyes narrowed. You were nothing before me. You'll be nothing after. The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Even the sheriff flinched. Rowan took a step forward, his voice low and steady. You're wrong about that. She's everything you'll never be: honest, brave, and free. Beck's smugness faltered. Freedom's not yours to give. Maybe not, Rowan said, but mercy is. He looked to the sheriff then, eyes burning. You know what's right, Jed. Don't let a man like this call himself justice. The sheriff's hand went to the paper Beck held. His fingers trembled. These signatures, they're legal enough, he said slowly. But no law worth keepin' should break what's already been mended. And with that, he tore the paper in half. Beck shouted, lunging forward. But Rowan caught him by the collar and shoved him back toward his wagon. Leave, Beck, before you find out what the law looks like in a man's hands. Beck's face went pale. He spat in the dirt, climbed into his seat, and whipped the reins hard. The wagon jolted forward, retreating into the horizon like a bad dream fading at dawn. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind quieted, and the sheriff just stood there, the torn halves of the contract fluttering from his hand. His voice was thick when he finally said, "Ain't seen a mercy that pure in all my years." Willa pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Rowan turned to her, his voice rough. "You're home now." The sheriff nodded once, eyes shining. "Maybe we all are." And for the first time in Copper Creek's memory, the law bowed its head not in defeat, but in reverence. Winter came soft to Copper Creek, blanketing the hills in white and quiet. The ranch looked almost new beneath the snow, like the land itself had decided to start over. Smoke curled from the chimney again, steady and sure, and the house that had once been silent now hummed with the sound of life. Inside, Willa Gray kneaded bread at the kitchen table, humming that same soft tune she'd once used to keep fear at bay. Only now, it carried warmth, the windows fogged with the scent of yeast and spice. On the mantel, Rowan's late wife's photograph sat beside a small vase of winterberries Willa had gathered from the grove. Rowan Cade entered from the cold, stamping snow from his boots. He'd been hauling hay all morning, but his eyes softened the moment they met hers. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, voice low. Willa smiled real, unguarded. "Heaven's got nothing on Copper Creek." He chuckled, setting his gloves by the fire. "Never thought I'd hear that said about this old place." "It's not the place," she said, brushing flour from her hands. "It's what it's turned into." He studied her then, the way she stood easy now, shoulders no longer tight, fear no longer hiding behind her smile. He'd seen her arrive as a ghost and watched her become something fierce and alive. "Town still talkin'?" she asked lightly. "Some," he admitted, pouring himself coffee. "But now they come for your bread more than your story." She laughed, a sound that filled the rafters. "Guess gossip doesn't taste near as good." Outside, a wagon approached. Through the frosted glass, Rowan recognized Sheriff Jed Knowles' broad frame. Willa quickly pulled an extra loaf from the oven, dusted it with flour, and set it on the table. When the sheriff stepped in, the warmth hit him first. "If this is justice," he said with a grin, "I might finally believe in it." Willa smiled shyly and handed him the loaf. "You'll always have a place at this table, Sheriff." He nodded, eyes glinting. "You've both given this town more peace than it knew it needed." When he left, Rowan and Willa stood by the window, watching him ride away beneath the falling snow. "Funny," Rowan said quietly. "Didn't think mercy could change a whole town." She looked up at him. "It didn't," she said. "It just changed us first." The fire crackled between them. Rowan reached across the table, his calloused hand finding hers. For a moment, neither spoke. There was no need to. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was home. That evening, the townsfolk gathered at the small church for supper. Willa sang as she served bread, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the rafters. Rowan sat near the front, hat in hand, a proud smile softening the roughness of his face. When the final hymn ended, he joined her in song, his deep, weathered voice blending with hers, not as farewell, but as a beginning. And when the sheriff looked away to hide the tear in his eye, even the church bell seemed to laugh. If you thought mercy couldn't change a whole town, wait till you see what their love does next.